Well, welcome everyone. Please bear with me today. I am incredibly tired. Things are crazy at Western right now. And I have had a really intense week, but it's wonderful to see you all. So I'm going to start with just a couple quick little announcements. And so I'm going to attempt to share my screen, but I seem to like always be so bad at it. Okay, so are we seeing the Willamette Promise website? Yes, okay. So there's just two things I want to point your attention to, and I think they were in the email that I sent out a while ago, but just so that everyone knows, Robert updated the guide for open access resources with video and PDF tutorials that you can give to your students that walk them through how to do searches with that tool. So if you're planning on trying to use any of these, you can integrate them into your classes, and Robert has made those kind of instructional materials for you. And the other thing I added, like we talked about, is kind of a list of some digital research tools that you can share with students, and I've used most of them, so I know that they work super well. And then everything that we're going to show you today is here on this brand new peer review card under resources on the documents page. So everything that you'll see is already here for you to use. Okay, so that's all of that fun stuff. And now I'm going to shift to this. Okay. And now we're seeing a Google slide. Yes? Okay. Just to make sure I haven't lost everyone in the process. So I thought what we would do today is spend some time talking about peer review, particularly strategies for remote delivery. This was a major concern that came up for everyone early on in our first meeting of the year. And so we'll talk about that today, and then quickly I'll share right again. But this should take you to the slides that I'm going to walk you through so that you have a copy of them for yourself, and I can just keep posting it in the chat for people who arrive late and won't be able to see it.
You're going to need to change the share settings on that.
Oh, goodness. All right, let's try again. Hold on here. Well, that is super weird. Oh, here we go. Okay, let's try this one. Thanks, I know. All right, try this one. And does that one open for anyone? Yes? Oh, thank you. Okay, awesome. Here we go. Take two. Okay, so peer review. The thing is here, so here's like the kind of crazy thing is that peer review actually really does work super well online. I do peer review online all the time. Here's the problem with that is that peer review takes a lot of time because it requires that you actually teach students how to do peer review, have them read things about peer review, and that you model for them like crazy to show them how to do it. And so the struggle that we're all having now is that the constraints of delivering our courses online in very short time frames sometimes means that we have to make adjustments in what we prioritize. So I know that when we had the emergency switch last spring to online, with the exception of, I think, 2 of my instructors, they were all teaching online for the first time. And the #1 thing I told them to go ahead and drop was peer review, because they already had enough to try to figure out how to make that work, and we had a week and a half to get ready. So I'm going to say the same thing to all of you. Don't cut peer review, because it is really important and we need students to build those skills, but there are some things that you can do to make peer review activities a little more realistic for the constraints that we're dealing with. So for example, I would consider doing small peer review activities on something really, really focused, instead of necessarily doing peer review for a full draft right now. Full draft review, you can leave to you as the teacher to read and give comments to your students. But for your students, you might consider lessening the burden a little bit and having really focused peer review activities. One thing that sometimes helps with that is considering peer review partners, so that students are paired with one other student instead of necessarily being in a peer review group, because again, this reduces labor for your students. So they're not trying to juggle 3 or 4 other sets of student papers. So you might decide to put them in groups, like partners. The other thing I would say is to think about, for each activity, giving them some sense of what they should focus on. So one of the things I really like, and I put this on the website, there's a great video that goes over the describe, evaluate, suggest framework for giving feedback. And it's a really great video that's made for students. And then there's a modeling sheet that goes with it that explains each step further with some examples for students, so that they can see how to, those are the 3 types of feedback they should give: describing, evaluating, and suggesting. And I've given you a couple different feedback sheets that you can modify to, again, give students a framework to give comments. You know, for example, when I have students do something with first drafts, I forbid them to do anything with grammar. There's no point in commenting on grammar in a first draft. There's no point in doing anything with lower order concerns in a first draft. So instead, I write where I'm telling them very specifically, we're only looking at these big things today for this activity. But one option for you, depending on how much time you have for peer review, is to think about doing it in little focused activities and leave the bulk of the feedback for you to do on full drafts. That will make it a little easier and a little more realistic, I think, for your students as well. The other thing I would recommend, based on the Google survey and kind of the information that I have, is to consider doing both synchronous and asynchronous peer activities, because they offer different advantages for what the different stages that you're in the peer review process. And so I've given you 3 examples of ways I've partnered this before in my classes. So for example, again, with a first draft where we all know the most work is going to happen to that first draft, I would do a synchronous peer activity on Zoom, because that one needs a lot of guidance, a lot of work, lots of feedback and direction. And then for later reviews on later drafts, those are perfect for asynchronous activities, because your papers are more refined. They need less going forward than they do in the beginning. So it's much easier to then give students a little more hands-off activities later in the process. And so those are perfect for asynchronous sorts of designs. You could do, this one actually I've had really good luck with. So students do peer review asynchronously. So they exchange drafts, they write comments on their own time, and then instead I schedule asynchronous time for them to get in their small groups and actually discuss their feedback, right? So they're getting to do the same kind of thing that they would get to do in class in small groups, only they do the work first on their own and then they get together to work synchronously. And similarly, I think doing asynchronous activities that focus on small things like brainstorming, outlining, thesis statements, introductions, those work really well asynchronously because they're smaller, there's better parameters, you can give students really specific guidance so they don't get as lost, and then save a synchronous session if you're going to try to discuss a full draft, because as most of us know who've tried to do this before, if you're not sort of keeping a hand on your students during peer review, they're going to stop doing it and just start talking about other things with the people around them. Even my college students do this. If I don't walk around the room and keep poking them, eventually I'm going to walk into a really weird conversation that they're having about something completely unrelated to peer review. And so synchronous session is a really good opportunity for you to steer them and not let them kind of lose themselves. So just like some basic, these first two slides, my point is just to think about some really basic logistics for how to still let students have opportunities to engage with peer review and peer feedback, but maybe on a smaller scale than we've done before, to accommodate both the constraints of technology and the constraints of the fact that some of you are delivering Willamette Promise in a much shorter time frame than you have ever done before. And then, of course, I think the other major challenge is student engagement in peer review. That's for you, Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yeah, so with student engagement, I found that when I speak to students about peer review, they don't feel confident enough to give someone feedback, or they don't understand the purpose of getting the feedback. So I think letting the students brainstorm what is helpful to them, or maybe specific things in a project that they're working on that they would like feedback on, and then give them an opportunity to ask questions. And this is huge for me always for every assignment, is having students ask the questions themselves and then responding to that and using that as discussion. And you can do that synchronously or asynchronously, just in a discussion board post. And then also using their past experiences with good or bad feedback to develop class criteria for comments. So I think really just having students, giving them the control over the activity is really important so that they'll be engaged. And then also kind of going back to this idea of writing as a process more generally, and that no one is a great writer. There are great revisers, but there is not a great writer. And so I like to show different kinds of drafts depending on the students. Like I know that Ann Sexton has a lot of great drafts that are available, and like Sylvia Plath and things, but I found some from J.K. Rowling and Zora Neale Hurston, and I don't know what your students are reading, but there are things that you can find that are drafts that show the revision process of these famous authors and how they don't just sit down and get it all done, one and done. And so showing some of those examples for students, I think, can engage them and make them more confident in their writing and the revision process. And then do a reflective self-assessment of how their work aligns with the rubric. So taking the rubric and have them do their own assessment of their work, and so that they can see how what they're doing aligns with what's being asked of them or not, and then kind of going from there as well. So I really think just empowering students is always important, and letting them determine what is it that they need, that they would like feedback on. Whenever I send my work to a colleague or a peer or someone in my writing group, because I do have a writing group, I have specific things that I want them to look at. I feel really good about this, but I don't feel good about this other thing. So letting students kind of, go through their project and say, okay, I feel really good about this, but not so much here. But like Lee said, having them steer away from, these lower level things, and focusing on, depending on what kind of activity you're doing. And so always, I think, pointing out what they're doing well, letting them understand that they are doing something well, is really important for that engagement. But I think, looking at the sample drafts from authors is always fun, and it's cool to see the different ways that and where these authors are writing their drafts on napkins and things. It's just kind of cool for them to see the whole process of other writers. And I think that's all I've got right now.
Okay, cool. So to get you started, these things are always like right in my way. There we go. So to get you started, on the website, I put I shared 3 really focused peer review activities that you could do with your students. You can do them synchronously or asynchronously, just to give you a sense of things that you're welcome to tailor or completely ignore, or just completely lift and use because they're ready to be used and they work well. So, and each one includes both like a peer review activity with a post reflection for the author. So in this first one, you'd actually have peers swap papers and make a reverse outline of the other person's paper. So numbering their paragraphs, writing a description of each paragraph, kind of noting where things are unclear. This one I usually find is really helpful, especially in an early draft, to help writers see whether or not a reader is even getting their main message. And then I have students, anytime I do a peer workshop activity, I always have them do a reflection in class, which is basically kind of writing a little mini revision plan. So look at the outline your peer made. What did you learn? Where are you unclear? Where were you surprised that you're not saying what you think you're saying? What are your plans kind of moving forward? And so this is one I've had really good luck with students, especially early on in the process. And I think especially in classes where I feel like I have a group that is maybe a little shakier in their like overall writing skills, this one is usually a really good starting point. Oh yeah, great. I'm so glad you've done this too, David. This one, I've had really good luck with this one. So here's another one. This one I think is better for a later draft towards the end of the process. This one is all about conciseness. And so this is one I would save for later in the process, where what we want to do is read through and deal with pulling out all the extra fluff you've added to try to get to the page limit or the word count, and to focus on excessive wordiness, redundancies. And I usually do this one with color coding. So I'll have them highlight in yellow sections or sentences that are redundant, highlight in green things that could be cut that would make the paper more focused and concise, where quotations are effectively used or way overused. And then again, same thing, I end with a post-review reflection, right? Where do you need to work? But this is one that works really well late in the process when you want to help students work on polishing up a paper that mostly has its content together. And then the third activity really hits some of what Casey suggested, because I've also had really good luck with, in general, the rules that I set for peer review anytime I do it are different class to class, section to section, because I do a what do you like with feedback, what do you hate with feedback, and then that becomes our class rules for what kind of feedback you can and can't give. And I've always had really good luck with that. And so this is another activity that I really like, because it is totally the writer's choice what you focus on. And the thing that I changed is that I just changed the reviewer instructions to reflect the Willamette Promise rubric categories rather than my own assignment activities. So this one lets the author circle 2 things they want their peer to focus on. And then that is all the peer focuses on. So they are reading the whole draft, but they're reading it with a really narrow lens, just looking at these 2 areas. And then again, post-review reflection. That part is really important for me, because otherwise it makes the writer slow down a little bit and think about the feedback that they got, and think intentionally about how am I going to use this, because I want to discourage them from immediately thinking, my peers aren't experts, I shouldn't use this feedback, I need to wait and hear from my instructor. Those are myths I try to bust, and making them spend some time reflecting on how they're going to use it, what surprised them, what they learned, is something else that that has helped me help students take peer review seriously, if that makes sense. So those are all on the website for you. Like I said, those 3 activities along with 2 sample feedback sheets. If you're somebody that wants or likes to have students fill out some kind of guided worksheet, these are both 2 models that you can use and again, totally tweak and make your own or use as is if you prefer. But I've had really good luck when I've engaged with peer review, especially when the conditions are not ideal or just depending on what I feel is the expertise of my particular batch of students in making those smaller focused activities. Take some of the pressure off yourself right now and remove the burden of trying to figure out how to have all of your students read drafts 2 or 3 times, because that's a lot. And some of you are doing this in like 6 weeks. So, right, instead think about where are opportunities for 1 or 2 really focused peer review activities. They can still get really good feedback from peers. They can still get really good draft feedback from you, but it removes a little bit of labor and stress and sort of obstacles for figuring out how to deliver that with the constraints of our current educational environment. Okay, so that's part 1 before I turn us to our guest. But are there questions, comments, or thoughts at this point before we just keep on moving? Awesome. And yeah, if you're I think some of you may have used similar things before, especially if you're familiar with the Willamette Promise, and if you're new, and you try any of them, I would certainly love to hear how they work for you. But they're things I've always had pretty good luck with. So Casey and I also thought that more than listening to the 2 of us talk about this, that it might be really helpful to have one of our experienced Willamette Promise teachers share some of their revision strategies that they adapted for online teaching when we went into pandemic mode last spring. And so I've asked Carrie to talk with us today about doing revision online with some different methods, how that worked out, what the strategies are. And again, all the activities that she shared with me are already on the website for you. And so hopefully you have lots of things that you can pick up and just be ready to use when you get to that point. And otherwise, I think you should be good to screen share, but we may need to make Carrie a host, Adam, so that she can put everyone into breakout groups a little bit later in her presentation.
Done.
Okay.
All right, so it's the first time doing this online and presenting in front of teachers, and used to it with kids. So what she was talking about here in terms of like what I sent her is this top one. And this was Danielle and I that was teaching with me formally. Now I have Erin on my team. Danielle went off to McMinnville and left us. This is kind of what we put together last year. And a lot of it is stuff that you guys have seen or heard where we've just compiled it. So just trying to get this to open, and it's not opening, which I'm not sure why. It's downloading it every time. That's interesting. So I used this at that point in the year as kind of like what we were just going over, where it's like a menu for an author's choice, because we had already done almost all of these things in the past. And so when they got to what they were struggling with in draft 2 or 3, they could go to this menu and they could pick what they wanted to do. So it's kind of categorized by that. So like struggling with your intro, struggling with organization, and there's a bunch of activities for each category. And some of these are kind of already posted as well. So that is there, but this is way too much to go over. So what I did today is I put together just a few of these that we could go over, and I could show you kind of how I adapted them online and give you my take on what worked and what didn't work. Now, I did this in the spring. I just started writing 121 for this term Monday. So I've done some of these with literary analysis so far instead of argumentative, but I haven't repeated them with the actual writing 121 curriculum yet. So tips and tricks, I think that, you know, what you're, Erin, you're probably noticing that I'm not sharing this on present mode. So I'm going to switch my share so I can get your fancy little additions to my slideshow in there. So hold on. I was presenting on this new mode where you can select it so that I can see it, but that you can't make your transitions happen if you do it on that. So let me do it on the regular basic mode.
I thought you took the transitions out. You didn't like them.
I didn't take them out, but I like to present on that other mode now because I can see what's going on the other screen.
I think people should know about that.
If you don't know about what I'm talking about, is that if you're on Zoom and you go into your share screen and you hit advanced settings instead of regular settings, you can just share like a section of your screen. So I actually had not had it in present mode, but you guys saw it big because I had just that little green box around what I wanted to share, and you can move that as you're presenting. So I just learned about that last week and I love it. So I think some of these are going to be a repeat. We didn't coordinate on our on our presentations. So tips and tricks that I'm seeing online, and I think some of these aren't just online, but modeling. You got to model. I try to use my students' examples as much as possible, taking student samples and then maybe even rewriting them and talking about the differences and the different revisions and what was changed. I just grab them randomly and don't put their name on them and tell them if they want to admit it's their writing, they can. Otherwise, it's anonymous, and I'm using it because I saw a great opportunity to use it. Trying to write with your students as much as possible and verbalizing your mistakes and your thinking process, I think is huge. And my kids tell me that this modeling and those examples are a really big thing in changing what they do. That the concept of I do, we do, you do online, especially because it forces you to chunk it so you're not giving them too much information at once and taking a small amount of what you want to teach and just teaching that very focused thing. Kind of backs up what you were saying earlier. Instead of just a giant revision checklist, I find that when they get a giant checklist, they are maybe good at one thing on the checklist and do a poor job of giving feedback on many of the other things. So I actually used to use checklists and I don't use them anymore because I found that the feedback was not what I wanted. So I do more of the focused revisions now. Adding accountability to the breakout rooms. A couple ways that you can do that are just in the share out when you come back. You can obviously drop into the groups, but I also like to do sometimes an editable group doc where we're working on it together so I can kind of see what groups are needing help. So if we're doing some kind of activity where we're all contributing to something, like we did a quote integration activity after we practiced different ways to integrate quotes, then in groups, they went into a breakout room and they had to take textual evidence and integrate it into different styles. Well, I had the doc and everybody was working on it. So I could see group 5 was blank and group 4 was typing away. So I knew that I had to jump into group 5 to give them some feedback. And then trying to get them to use their learning right away. So starting with some kind of reflection about what they took away from this, and then trying to get them to apply it to their writing and give themselves some notes on their writing itself so they don't kind of forget what they've learned that day. So I already went over the post-revision strategies. There are way too many, and a lot of these that you guys, if you've been here for a while, you've seen them, but I'm just going to go through. I just picked a few of them today to kind of focus in on. So I've got 3 strategies that I'm going to hone in on today and show you what I did with them. And then I want to give us a chance to talk about this with each other, because you guys have different ideas too, and I want to learn different ideas. So we're going to get into breakout rooms and talk about some of the things that we do in classes. So the 3 intro, right? This is one that we introduced somebody, I don't know who introduced it a few years ago in Willamette Promise, and I really like this. I've added a few things to it. I usually do this strategy a little bit later. I know when I first came into this program, I focused on teaching introductions and doing those right away, and I have gravitated towards introductions being not very important until later on in their drafting process, because they haven't formed their ideas well enough to write a good introduction. So I usually do this around draft 2, and some of the students that feel like they still need more work in this would then repeat this in like draft 3. I find the more they research and write, the better their intros become. And like I said, sometimes I just actually skip the intro altogether, and or they can just put something really rough up there, and then I have them read their paper and highlight like what I really mean is, what I'm really trying to prove is, and then once they've kind of deducted that, they can go back and start writing their introduction. And then I've learned a lot about writing non-traditional introductions in this group, and so now I have finally gotten students to do that. So I try to show some non-traditional introductions as well, where the thesis doesn't come until a little bit later in the paper, paragraph 2 or 3. So I like to do this kind of in a chunked way. I'll take 40 minutes and they'll write their introduction 3 different times. It technically takes longer than 40 minutes because I stop in between each one and do an instruction. So I put together last year online this, where I grabbed 3 different introductions styles, and I would start by saying what the style was, and then I kind of annotated in the side what I saw. So we would read through this type of style, and we would read through my annotations and what I'm pointing out and talk about it a little, and then I would go have them try to mimic their style, and I would set that 10-minute timer, and they would just write for 10 minutes. When they were done with that, we would do it again. We'd go back to that document, come back as a group, read through the second style, read through the annotations for what I saw in that style, and then go back and write for 10 minutes. And I had a lot of students that stuck with me in the spring say that this really helped them, that they felt like their introductions got a lot better, and they had never really felt like they had been good at introductions. So I really liked it. And then read and reflect on what introduction they liked best. Sometimes I've done it where I've had them in the breakout room and they've shared those 3 introductions with a peer, and the peer would say which one they liked best and try to see if it's the same one the writer likes best, and have kind of a conversation about that and why, so get somebody else's take on that. So I want to just open this up. Are there any like comments about introductions or anything else that people would like to add to this, or that do this activity, that they could want to unmute and just say something else they've done with it, or something else that they've thought works? I see there's some stuff that came in the chat, but I can't really read the chat.
Yeah, I added some stuff in the chat just because, and I haven't done this, but what I like about this is it seems to have sort of organically emerged out of my classroom. We're just working with kids and seeing that, yeah, actually they do have about halfway through, or like Lee said, sometimes about all the way to the end, oh, there's your introduction. But I love the intentionality of this exercise. I like that it has a very specific, like, push your brain into this corner over here and work, then come back out, try it over in this corner, work. I like that idea a lot. I think that's cool.
And I saw that, Lee, in the chat, you said sometimes their conclusions work really well. And in the revision sheet, we have that introduction conclusion swap where they actually swap their two and read them in that order. And I had them do that with the last literary analysis paper that we did. And a lot of them actually at least took some of their conclusion and moved it to the introduction. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and go on to the next strategy unless somebody else has something. Okay. So color coding, Lee, you just mentioned another way that this could be done. I do this in so many different ways throughout the year. And there's so many different things that you could focus in on. So online, what I have them do is I have them make a copy of their essay. And if they're going to do this as a peer review, then share it with their peer. And if you want, you could have them make 2 copies and they each do the activities on that section of the paper that you're working with. And then they can meet up, do a split screen, and they can compare what they have found. So here are some of the potential focus areas that I've done before, looking at particularly at academic language or terminology. Like we just did a literary analysis unit, and they had a word wall in their interactive notebook, and I said, all right, we've got to go try to find all the verbs and all the academic language, and you need to go through the paper and you need to highlight for that. And if you don't have a lot of highlighting, it shows you're probably not writing very much in this genre. So it's kind of the same thing with their paper. You know, they have a word wall, they're collecting all their stuff for environmental sustainability, or they're collecting their stuff for borders and migration, and trying to pick up the language that the academic world uses with that. And then they can go into their paper and they could try to figure out, have they used that? Where do they see that? Organization of main points. I think color coding works really well for organization. So the writer would make a key at the top of their copy of their essay, and they would go read through their paper and they would list their main points, and each main point would be a color. And then the peer could go through the paper to see if there's any mixing of colors. And you know, I teach it, there should be some mixing of colors, because sometimes you refer back to something, or you need to transition into something, but you should also have paragraphs that are fairly solid and not looking like a rainbow if you are staying on task. I do that with the thesis as well. If we break apart the thesis, I'll show that one on the next slide. So that one I'll show you kind of broken out in a slide where I actually presented it with students. Textual integration, variety, like go through, highlight every single one of the places that you've integrated textual evidence, and then kind of study it for variety. If you've taught variety and given the variety names, you could actually color code it like, oh, when they do a name drop or source drop, we're going to make it yellow. When they integrate the idea just in a regular sentence, we're going to make that pink. And when they summarize somebody's point and just cite a source, we're going to make that green. Content balancing, I like to tell them, you know, I like to get them to focus on balancing their content. And so you can color code a paper and see if they've done that. You know, do they come back with their evidence being the majority of it, or do they have a lot of discussion in between, or do they not have any evidence and it's all discussion? So looking at balancing, I think it's a good visual. I actually do this I even do this color coding in the reflections. So I take the kind of what the reflective paper is going to cover in it, and I give them a series of questions after they get back their draft, and they reflect on those questions. Then they go into their reflection and they color code it. In their reflection, did they use textual evidence? Because in the essay, the reflective essays are going to have to use textual evidence. Did they analyze their reading strategies? Did they analyze their sources? And so I look at their reflection and actually make it color coded. I didn't do a slide for that one, but opposition counterclaims. I mean, there's a million things you could do with color coding. It's kind of read the papers. What does your class need, and make the activity around that. So this was one that I saw we needed work on last spring after I saw the second draft in the works. And so what we did is we kind of broke down the thesis. So these thesis statements are often more complex and they have multiple parts to them that you're proving. So we took this thesis in the example. Moving to renewable energy is critical if we're going to attempt to slow climate change. However, we must implement the idea of renewable energy into every aspect of our education. It will not be enough to switch to solar and wind power and use that energy for production that creates tons of waste. We must produce in such a way that the waste from one product can serve as a resource to the next. In addition, another highly possible solution is using video games to teach more renewable methods, because this method could reach generation in a platform that they enjoy learning. Kind of see different things that this section of the intro was proving. Yellow, this move towards needing renewable resources. Pink, how it's addressed. How do we address this waste in implementing new sources? And blue, kind of an additional add-on. It's through education and innovative ideas. Then they can go through their paper and do the same thing. Like, when are they addressing those things? So this just kind of was the breakdown for the students of how I did that activity. Once they've color-coded their thesis, they went on to step 3, read through the essay, marked it with the same colors. Step 4, at the bottom, reflect. You could do this, have a peer do this, or they could do it together. And the last strategy that I adapted is something that we did a few years ago, where we actually took an essay and we cut it up, like physically chopped it up with scissors, and broke up the paragraphs and mixed them up, and then we would have to try to reconstruct the essay. So I loved how hands-on this activity was, and you can't bring that aspect of it to online unless they have a printer and they can do this. But the workaround that I got with this one is that you make a copy of that document and rearrange the paragraph. So you do this one for organization if they've got solid transitions, checking if there's a logical order. And basically, this is the steps that I use to break that activity down to modify it online. Step 1, make a copy, rename it, mix up essay, whatever you want to call it, first and last name. Step 2, go through your essay and actually cut and paste and move your paragraphs, get rid of headers, get rid of titles, things that are going to point out which would be the intro and which would, so rearrange them without those things. And then share it with the peer all mixed up. And see if the peer can read the essay and move the paragraphs back into the correct logical order, or the order you thought was logical. And that's kind of what it's checking out. And then I would have the students go back and arrange the essay and say why using the comment button. I put this as your introduction or your first paragraph because, and I thought this was your first main point because, and they actually, with each paragraph, give a little bit of a rationale to why they ordered it that way. And then have them meet in the breakout rooms, have them share a screen and do a split screen. So take the original essay and put it up on one, and take the cut up essay and put it up on one. Do the paragraphs match? Or where are the problems? Why don't they match? And that's where the discussion kind of comes up. That one takes a little while. So just realize that is going to take a huge chunk of class to do that, because you'd be reading an entire paper. But I had students that really liked this one. In fact, some of them would do this asynchronously. They'd make their own Google Meets, their own Zoom. They'd meet together and they would do this. And I feel like I've talked way too long. So I want to try out a couple of things with you guys that I do in my class and get you guys to talk a little bit. So one of the things that I do is I have one of my tricks has been this thing called waterfall, where I got this from, I think it's in the digital playbook, where, when you're trying to give feedback, or ask a question and you're back in a whole group and you're always getting the same people responding with the answers in the chat box or the same people unmuting. So the waterfall, what it does is it kind of forces everybody to participate. So you open up the chat box, you have a question, they type their answer. And I tell them, screen's on, type your answer. When your answer is already in the chat, don't hit enter, so don't populate it. And then when you're done, turn the screen off. And when I see all the screens get dark and everybody's off, I say, okay, you guys are ready. And I'll do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And the chat box populates with like 25, 30, whatever, how many students you have, answers. And then we go back and we kind of read through those. So that's kind of one way that I did this. So I thought we would try that out. So if you have done this or have never done this, you'll see it today. So open up the chat box, everyone. This is required participation. If you've seen me present before, I'm usually making you move around the room. So I haven't made anybody get out of their seat, but I am making you open the chat box. All right, in the chat box, I want you guys to kind of do the same thing I would do with my students unless you're in a really weird spot in your house. Camera's on. And then when they're off, I know that you've answered this question in the chat box. The key is do not hit enter. Okay, you type your answer. I will tell you when to hit enter and it will all populate at the same time. Okay, so your question today is, what was one takeaway from the revision activities that were presented today, either Lee's or either presentation, it doesn't matter, or what was one strategy that you want to try? So I'm going to open my chat box and also participate here. So do not hit enter. When all the screens are black, I'll know that we are ready to populate. So once you have typed your answer, turn off your screen and I'll know that we're ready to create our waterfall of great knowledge. All right, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And I don't want them to just hit enter, and I'm really excited because I got a bunch of kids to participate. I will then say, all right, let's go read them. So let's spend a minute here and kind of go back and see what people said. So kind of scroll up about 15, 20 people and take a look at what people got out of this or what they want to try. I think that mine was the first one that populated. So if you're wondering where in the chat to start, it's 451. And I think it's my comment there. Or it's right around Rachel's or mine, somewhere there. All right, for our next one, I'm going to send this into breakout rooms because I want to give you guys a chance to talk. We've been sitting here for 52 minutes and there's only been three or four people in this entire room that have talked, which is way too long and terrible teaching. Sorry. So let's get you. I don't see that I have the breakout rooms. So,
I'm happy to do that for you if you tell me how many people you'd like
in
each.
I'd like maybe like 4, somewhere where 4 to 5. And then your focus, you guys, when he sends us there, is for us to give a chance to share something that we do that wasn't presented today. So kind of a give one, get one. Give a strategy, take a strategy, and just everyone in the room just have a little bit of time to talk. I'm thinking if we're groups of 4 or 5, 10 minutes, is that enough? Or do I have that much time left? I don't know.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's perfect, Carrie.
Okay. And then we'll come back and I'm done after that.
You've done wonderful. Well, hi again, everyone, and thank you to Carrie for that great presentation. So I thought maybe we might do just some large group sharing of what happened in our breakout rooms. Like, what are some of the great ideas you shared, or some cool things that you're excited to try in the future? I think that will be kind of a good sort of way for us to wrap up today's kind of focus on peer review. What'd you chat about?
I asked Jonathan to share with Adam so that he could kind of distribute it to us, something that he showed us. And what I liked about it is it just basically just had them read through and look for very specific things, like how did this writer establish exigence, and how did this, he had several things on there that I thought were just like good pointed areas that we should have them kind of consider and analyze. So
yeah, I don't use the language that we would talk about in 122 yet. This idea of the moves a writer would make, so I don't use that language, but essentially what I'm having them do is I'm having them identify those writerly moves of establishing exigence and put them in their own words so that they can say, this is what they think, this is what my reader thinks my exigence is, or this is what my reader thinks my position is, or this is what my reader thinks my issue is I'm responding to. And they can see that and be like, well, they totally didn't get what my position is. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. How about others? What else came up in your chats?
We also discussed in that group just a bit about how to pick peer groups, like how that would work. Pairing a stronger writer with a potentially like a weaker writer, or both, and trying to figure out the best. I mean, just discussing different ways to do that, because some of that can get tricky.
We talked about what we liked is that not all of those strategies are brand new. Some of them are, they're iterations of things that we know and love, but in the moment and in the panic of the distance learning, I feel like my brain freezes all the time, right? So I'm getting ready to create a lesson that I've done 100 times, and I'm having a brain freeze about, like, well, how am I going to do that digitally? And that those are these wonderful versions of how to translate that online. And that it's this nice list in this review that you can just scroll through and go, oh, that's the way I can do that now in this environment. And that's lovely. I really can't express how great it is, because more than anything, my brain has felt overwhelmed. Like, I should know how to do these things, but in the moment I can't think of them. And just hearing you have the translation of how to do those, I felt like my brain just opened up, and except it was like, oh, all of these things. I could do any or all of these things. They're all options, and I know them and I recognize them, and it's just a matter of getting them into the online environment. I really appreciate, Carrie, the work on that slideshow so much.
Well, I mean, I felt like it was kind of the one fortunate thing about spring is that the governor was like, hey, seniors, you don't have to stay here anymore. And half of them left and half of them stayed. So I got this really awesome group of like 15 kids. And I was able to like experiment and try it out. And I already had a great relationship with them, so I could find out like, how does this work for you? What do I need to change? And so they were like my pilot group, and the rest of the seniors just went off and didn't learn, but they really helped me. And, to say like, don't get rid of revision, because I've already gotten 4 emails from those students that told me in college I'm using those revision strategies on my papers for other classes. So I know that they can take them and transform if they get good at them.
Yeah, I would echo that. Like, I find that when students have already had some exposure to peer review and revision activities in high school, they are way more successful in the on-campus college 121, 122 courses, whether they successfully do a portfolio with Willamette Promise or not. So, like, even if you can't do it exactly like you've done it in the past, any small activities are going to be really good experience for them and help them move into college. So, like, yes, like, even if you have to make adjustments and make it smaller, still super, super good. How about others? Other ideas, other things you're excited to try, or things we didn't talk about, or other just questions that we didn't cover today that still pertain to peer review? Oh, there we go.
One of the things that we kind of talked about was some of the struggles with peer review, whether we're in class or whether we're in person or online. And it was nice to hear that other people had some of the same issues. And so it's really good to be reminded of how important it is, and that I need to keep trying and find a way to work it in that works for the students too. So
Yeah.
that was good.
I need to look more at your conciseness activity, because I have some students that really need help with that. And I'm, like I said, my group, I'm really good at pointing it out and not so good at teaching how to fix it. So I'm very excited that you have that posted. With that said, I might look at it and say, I don't know what to do still, but because I haven't read it. So when I look at it, I might be asking for some more advice on how to do that, because I really need to get better at not just pointing it out, but teaching how to fix it.
Oh, totally. That one is usually a really fun one. Sometimes I do it first with with a silly activity where I will pull like a paragraph from an excessively wordy writer and let them, and we have a competition to see who can reduce it to the most concise like thing. And so I have them get in little groups and we kind of compete. The meaning has to stay the same, but how can we make it the most concise and cut out all this extra garbage? And then we transition kind of into their own papers. But that kind of makes it fun first. Yeah, Wallace isn't a bad choice. But yeah, like anyone will work, but it is sometimes fun to be like, here's somebody that is real wordy, and let's make this into something really, really tight. And then let's look at your own papers. And again, we're not going to be that aggressive, but let's find places where we can make your meaning tighter so that your readers are getting a really crisp understanding of your argument. That one is really fun. But yes, if you try any of them out or you start playing with them and you have follow-up questions, you can always email me, and you of course can change anything you want about any of them. But I have found sometimes, especially right now, when I sometimes don't have the time I want to have for prepping for my class, that sometimes having some grab and go activities that are already made that you can just pick up and use is just really handy. Just to give you a little break from having to always plan something brand new. I don't think, Carrie, could we share the link to your slideshow, or some, like, either here or I can put it on the website, or however?
Yeah, let me go in and change the share settings, and then I'll put it in the chat.
Cool. That would be perfect. And then I think the last thing we'll head into, because we're kind of winding down to our final minutes, and I don't think we meet again until January. That's right? And so like we are heading into the season when we would typically start focusing a bit more on norming, like looking at some sample papers, looking at scoring, thinking about how the essays work, kind of getting ready for that kind of assessment part of our program. But I do want to kind of check back in with everyone because I know that some of you haven't even started yet and aren't going to until next semester. Are there other big concerns on the table that would be helpful for Casey and I to do kind of a focused PLC on? That's kind of our goal this year. Shorter PLCs that are thematic on like one thing so that you've got stuff you can just take and use and go. Because we're happy to address those and find ways to do looking at papers a bit later. If there are things that still remain beyond what we've covered already that would be helpful, I would love to hear those if anyone has an idea floating around out there. Okay, so not right now. We're all feeling kind of okay. That's okay. You can always email me with an idea later, and I'll probably check in anyways when we get closer to January to see if there are any new things that have come up that you would like us to kind of hit on. I think we immediately hit on the two really big ones that came up from September, which was like, how do we deal with research? How do we deal with peer review? Those ones seemed like major concerns for everybody. So if there's something else that would be very helpful for us to try to focus on and address, we can do that. Otherwise, we will start heading into our period where we look a bit more at sample papers from last year, which was our first year with the brand new readings. So we'll look at some different papers, see how those turned out, and start working on getting ready to do scoring as we kind of head into the end of the academic year, which can't come soon enough, in my opinion. This whole year is a wash. So that will be kind of our
looking at papers, and that would be good. Just a lot of us are finishing. Like I'm going to be done with my first group of students in January.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
usually I'm not done until May. So.
Wow. So yeah, so I think it's always really helpful to read papers together, to talk about how we score them, to talk about what they are and aren't doing well. Plus the other real helpful benefit is that we desperately need to update our models on the website because they're all the old papers from the old readings. And so they're not, and honestly, we've also changed the rubric since then. So they're not helpful, I don't think. So I do really want to update our models so that you have new current papers we could have annotated or not annotated, but that you can use in classes that are really good for lining up with how we're currently scoring, what our readings currently are. And so this is a good way for us to also pull some. It's also great as you start reading your own papers. If you come across one that you think this is a great model, please send that to me. And it's one that I can work to get up on the website for us so that we have a good pool that we can use for students kind of moving forward. So that's one goal that I have for Casey and I for the year, is to kind of update our models so we've got some better papers. All right, well, I think
Do we have to have student permission? Is that how we send you models, as we ask them, is it okay to share this? Or
I think, don't they sign a release of work, Adam, when they begin?
Yeah, it should be posted to the writing website.
Yeah.
There's a student release of work.
So
But yeah, if you want to do that after too, if that's something you didn't do, but you do want to submit a series of papers, that's perfectly fine.
And that would be super awesome. The other, I guess, like I'll think about it because I forget now that you're all in super different places. So last year was the first year that the WU First Year Writing Program published our digital first year writing anthology. And we saved a spot in the edition for the Best Willamette Promise essay. And so I think Carrie's student was the one selected for this first issue, and so is published. And so that call will, I collect papers from students every single term, and we make a decision in the spring. And so I'll send out a reminder to everyone in January, but if you are already getting close to collecting papers, feel free to think about if you receive one that you think is a super outstanding example of first year writing, that's a great choice to submit, and you send that right to me, and I will add that to the pool of papers for the anthology. But I will send a reminder around, I think, starting in January, when I think more of you will be getting closer to having papers or finally collecting papers. But just keep it kind of in your mind. All right, I think that's all we've got, Adam, if you need a few final minutes.
No, I don't think I do. We'll have some updates out later and kind of a series of optional trainings. We have improved OR skills. We've updated that software to a version 2, which has some really cool features, and I'm gonna have some kids crying here in the background. But one of the features is you can create a section and check out prompts and check in work samples for an entire section at a time. So it's a lot slicker. That system is up and running now, just at the normal orskills.wesd.org. Free introduced lunch scholarship posted online, payment link updated. I'm going to mute myself. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to email anytime if you have questions, run into problems. Have safe and happy holiday seasons insofar as you are able. And I will look forward to seeing everyone in the new year, where hopefully things will start looking brighter for all of us. And otherwise, take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lee. Take care of yourself and get some rest.
Oh, I know.
It's no bueno when you're exhausted. I have had a couple of those, so
So tired.
yeah, get your rest. Bye.
Bye. You're muted, Kelly.